Welcome, brave souls, to another spine-tingling tale from the Nightmare Maestro. Tonight, we delve into the shadows of a once grand hotel where a lone night auditor is about to uncover secrets best left buried. What lies behind the door of room 237, and why do the guests keep complaining about disturbances from a room that should be empty? Prepare yourselves for a journey into the heart of darkness, where the truth is more terrifying than any ghost story. The majestic Grand Hotel loomed against the night sky, its faded Victorian facade a stark reminder of better days. Inside, at the ornate front desk, sat Mark Holloway, the night auditor. His weary eyes scanned the dimly lit lobby, its grandeur diminished by peeling wallpaper and threadbare carpets. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of decay, a fitting atmosphere for a hotel well past its prime. Mark had taken this job out of desperation, needing the quiet hours to focus on his writing. But 3 months in, he'd barely touched his manuscript. Something about the hotel drained his creativity, leaving him anxious and on edge. Each night, as he walked through the cavernous lobby to start his shift, he felt as if the shadows were watching him, waiting for him to let his guard down. As the antique clock chimed midnight, its sonorous tones echoing through the empty space, Mark began his nightly routine. He logged into the ancient computer system, its whirring fan a constant companion in the silent lobby. The blue glow of the monitor cast eerie shadows across his face as he scrolled through the night's guest list. It was sparse. A traveling salesman in 103, an elderly couple in 205, and a businesswoman in 412. Mark's gaze lingered on room 237, vacant as it had been for weeks. He couldn't shake the feeling that the room was waiting for something. A chill ran down his spine as he remembered the odd way the hotel manager had emphasized that 237 was never to be rented out. Shaking off the thought, he turned his attention to the night's paperwork, the scratching of his pen, the only sound in the oppressive silence. The phone's shrill ring pierced the quiet, making Mark jump. He answered, recognizing the gruff voice of Mr. Peterson from 103. The man was livid, complaining about loud noises coming from the room next door. Mark frowned, knowing 105 was empty. He assured Mr. Peterson he'd investigate, a knot of unease forming in his stomach as he hung up the phone. Rising from his chair, Mark cast a wary glance around the lobby. The stuffed head of a long-dead stag stared back at him from above the fireplace, its glass eyes reflecting the dim light. For a moment, Mark could have sworn he saw them blink. He shook his head, blaming his imagination and lack of sleep. With a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the desk, his footsteps muffled by the worn carpet as he made his way towards the stairs. Mark's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as he approached room 105. The musty smell of old carpet filled his nostrils, mingling with a faint metallic scent he couldn't quite place. The wallpaper, once a cheery floral pattern, now peeled in places, revealing patches of moldy drywall beneath. Ornate sconces cast pools of dim light at regular intervals, barely dispelling the gloom. He pressed his ear against the door of 105, straining to hear any sound from within. Nothing but silence greeted him, broken only by the soft creaking of the old building settling. Mark's hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his master key. The lock turned with a reluctant groan, and he cautiously pushed the door open. The room was dark and still, showing no signs of recent occupancy. He flicked on the lights, illuminating faded floral wallpaper and heavy, outdated furniture. Everything seemed to be in order, yet the air felt thick with an inexplicable tension. Mark moved slowly through the room, checking the bathroom and closet, half expecting to find an intruder hiding in the shadows. As Mark turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He spun around, heart racing, but saw only his own reflection in the dresser mirror. The face that stared back at him was pale and drawn, dark circles under the eyes betraying his lack of sleep. For a split second, he thought he saw another face superimposed over his own, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a rictus grin. Mark blinked, and the illusion vanished. Cheating himself for his overactive imagination, he locked up and returned to the front desk. His footsteps hurried in the empty hallway. No sooner had he settled back into his chair than the phone rang again. This time, it was the elderly couple from 205, their voices trembling, as they described hearing what sounded like a violent argument from the room above them. Room 305, another vacant room. Mark assured them he would look into it, his own voice shaking slightly as he spoke. Mark's unease deepened as he replaced the receiver. 2 complaints about noise from empty rooms in one night was beyond coincidence. He pulled up the hotel's layout on his computer, studying it intently. The screen flickered, the image distorting for a moment before stabilizing. A pattern began to emerge, one that sent a chill down his spine. Both 105 and 305 shared a wall with room 237. As he stared at the layout, the shadows in the corners of the lobby seemed to grow deeper, pressing in around him. Mark rubbed his eyes, trying to focus. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something, a secret that the very walls of the hotel were trying to keep hidden. With a sense of grim determination, he stood up once more, deciding to investigate room 237 itself. As he walked towards the stairs, he could have sworn he heard a faint whisper carried on the stale air. "Turn back." Armed with a flashlight and his growing sense of dread, Mark made his way to the second floor. The corridor stretched before him, shadows dancing in the beam of his light. The carpet muffled his footsteps, creating an illusion of floating through the dimly lit hallway. Faded paintings lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow Mark as he passed. As he approached room 237, the air seemed to grow colder, the silence more oppressive. The brass numbers on the door gleamed dully in the flashlight beam, the metal tarnished with age. Mark's hand trembled slightly as he inserted his key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Frowning, he tried again, but the mechanism remained stubbornly jammed. Mark pressed his ear to the door, listening intently. For a moment, he thought he heard something, a faint, rhythmic sound, like labored breathing, but when he focused, there was only silence. He stepped back, shining his flashlight around the doorframe. In the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of what looked like dark stains seeping from beneath the door. But when he turned to look directly, the floor was clean. Frustrated and unnerved, Mark decided to check the hotel's maintenance logs. As he turned to leave, a muffled thud came from within the room, followed by what sounded like scratching against the door. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He called out, asking if anyone was there, but received no response. The scratching continued for a moment, then abruptly stopped. Heart pounding, he hurried back to the front desk, casting nervous glances over his shoulder. The shadows seemed to move in his peripheral vision, reaching out with tendrils of darkness. Mark quickened his pace, not slowing until he was safely behind the desk once more. With shaking hands, he pulled out the maintenance logs, a thick binder filled with yellowed pages. As he flipped through the entries, a cloud of dust rose, making him cough. The maintenance logs revealed something odd. Room 237 had been marked as permanently out of order nearly a decade ago, with strict instructions never to rent it out. Yet there was no explanation as to why. Intrigued and unsettled, Mark dug deeper into the hotel's records. Over the past 10 years, there had been multiple complaints about strange noises and disturbances around room 237, always dismissed or explained away by management. Notes in the margins hinted at cover-ups, with phrases like "situation handled" and "guest compensated" appearing frequently. As Mark pored over the logs, the lobby seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. The stuffed stag's eyes glinted in the dim light, and for a moment, Mark could have sworn he saw it turn its head to stare directly at him. He blinked, and everything was normal again, but the feeling of being watched, of something ancient and malevolent stirring within the walls of the hotel, remained. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark turned to the internet, searching for any information about the majestic Grande's history. The ancient computer wheezed and sputtered as he navigated through news archives and local history sites. What he found chilled him to the bone. 10 years ago, the hotel had been at the center of a gruesome scandal. A wealthy guest had been found dead in room 237, his body mutilated beyond recognition. The official report ruled it a suicide, but rumors persisted of a cover-up involving powerful political figures and organized crime. Witnesses reported hearing screams in the night, followed by an eerie silence. The case had been closed quickly, with minimal investigation. As Mark delved deeper, he discovered a pattern of mysterious deaths and disappearances linked to the hotel over the decades. Each incident had been quietly swept under the rug, the hotel's reputation carefully maintained by a succession of owners with deep pockets and questionable morals. Stories of guests checking into rooms, never to be seen again. Whispers of dark rituals performed in the hotel's basement. Staff members quitting abruptly, refusing to speak about their experiences. The more Mark read, the more he felt like he was falling down a rabbit hole of conspiracy and cover-ups. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, but he couldn't stop. There was a connection here, a thread of darkness that ran through the hotel's history, always leading back to room 237. The sound of the elevator dinging snapped Mark out of his research. He looked up, expecting to see a guest, but the lobby was empty. The elevator doors stood open, revealing nothing but darkness within. As Mark watched, transfixed, the doors slowly closed, and the indicator light began to move, up, stopping at the second floor. A cold sweat broke out on Mark's forehead as he realized where the elevator was headed. He pulled up the security camera feed, switching to the second floor hallway. The elevator doors opened, spilling light into the corridor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a shadow moved across the floor, heading towards room 237. It was formless, more like a patch of deeper darkness than a solid object, but it moved with purpose. Mark leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. As the shadow reached room 237, it seemed to seep under the door, disappearing from view. The hallway was left in silence, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. Whatever secret room 237 held, it was stirring, awakening after years of dormancy. In that moment, Mark realized he was no longer just a night auditor doing his job. He had stumbled onto something much bigger, much darker than he could have imagined. And now, for better or worse, he was part of it. The shrill ring of the hotel's ancient phone cut through the tension, making Mark jump. He answered with a shaky voice, his eyes still glued to the security monitor. The caller identified himself as Vincent Donahue, the night manager Mark had never met. The voice on the other end was smooth and cultured, with an underlying tone that made Mark's skin crawl. Vincent's tone was calm, almost soothing, as he inquired about the night's events. There was something hypnotic about his voice, and Mark found himself spilling everything. The noise complaints, the jammed lock, his discoveries about the hotel's dark past. As he spoke, a part of him screamed that something was very wrong, but he couldn't stop the words from tumbling out. It was as if Vincent's voice had tapped into some deep well of truth within him. The night manager listened patiently, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding. When Mark finally fell silent, Vincent sighed. He explained that old hotels often accumulated stories and rumors, most of them baseless. The noises were probably just the building settling, the lock in need of repair. As for the hotel's history, well, every business had its share of unfortunate incidents. Mark wanted to argue, to point out the overwhelming evidence he'd uncovered, but Vincent's words seemed to wrap around his mind like a fog. He found himself nodding along, his earlier certainty fading. The urgency of his discoveries slipped away, replaced by a strange sense of calm. Perhaps he had been overreacting, letting his writer's imagination run wild in the quiet of the night. Vincent instructed Mark to forget about room 237 and focus on his duties. There was no need to alarm the guests or spread unfounded rumors. The night manager's voice took on a stern edge as he reminded Mark of the importance of discretion in the hospitality industry. Mark agreed, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. As he hung up, he noticed the shadow on the security feed had vanished. The hallway was empty once more. For a moment, Mark sat in silence, his mind feeling oddly blank. Then, with mechanical movements, he began to organize the front desk, filing away the maintenance logs and closing the browser windows with his research. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important. But every time he tried to grasp the thought, it slipped away like smoke. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Mark went through the motions of his job, greeting the occasional late-night arrival and preparing the morning reports. But a part of him remained alert, watching from behind a veil of artificial calm. And in the back of his mind, a single thought persisted, too faint to fully form, but too stubborn to disappear entirely. Something was very, very wrong at the majestic Grand Hotel. As the night wore on, Mark tried to lose himself in mundane tasks, pushing thoughts of room 237 to the back of his mind. But every creak of the old building, every flicker of the lights, sent his heart racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the hotel itself was aware of his presence and his knowledge. The lobby clock ticked away the hours, each sound echoing in the cavernous space. Mark found himself staring at the elegant hands, watching as they crept towards the witching hour. As the clock struck 3 a.m., a chill ran down his spine. In the stories he'd read during his research, 3 a.m. had come up repeatedly, the time when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when the dead could speak to the living. As if on cue, the front doors swung open, admitting a gust of cold air and a new guest. The man who entered was distinguished-looking, his silver hair neatly combed and his suit impeccably pressed. But there was a wildness in his eyes, a tension in his movements that spoke of barely contained panic. The man approached the desk, introducing himself as Senator Howard Blake. As Mark checked him in, he noticed the senator's hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting nervously around the lobby. The politician's gaze lingered on the staircase leading to the upper floors, and he flinched at every sound.
While retrieving a room key, Mark accidentally knocked over a stack of brochures. As he bent to pick them up, a yellowed newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor. His blood ran cold as he read the headline, "Senator's Aide Found Dead in Hotel Room." The article was dated exactly 10 years ago, and the grainy photo showed a younger Senator Blake standing in front of the majestic Grand. Mark's eyes snapped to the senator, who was now staring at him with a mixture of fear and resignation. In that moment, the pieces fell into place. The senator's presence, the anniversary of the death, the strange call from the night manager, it was all connected to room 237. Before Mark could speak, the lobby lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and Mark could hear the senator's panicked breathing. When emergency power kicked in seconds later, casting everything in a dim red glow, Senator Blake was gone. The front doors stood open, swinging gently in the night breeze. Mark stood frozen behind the desk, his mind reeling. The fog that had clouded his thoughts since the night manager's call was lifting, replaced by a stark clarity. The senator's reaction, the decade-old news clipping, the persistent disturbances, it all pointed to a truth too terrible to contemplate. In that moment, Mark made a decision. He couldn't ignore this any longer. Whatever dark secret lay behind the door of room 237, he had to uncover it. The weight of a decade's worth of lies and cover-ups pressed down on him, spurring him into action. With trembling hands, Mark reached under the desk and pulled out the ancient ledger where past night auditors had left notes for their successors. He flipped to the last page and scrawled a hasty message. "If I don't return, the truth is in room 237. It felt melodramatic, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far more dangerous than he could imagine. Taking a deep breath, Mark grabbed the master key and a heavy flashlight. He cast one last glance around the lobby, half expecting to see Vincent Donahue materialize from the shadows. But he was alone, the stuffed stag's glassy eyes the only witness to his departure from the desk. As Mark approached the staircase, the emergency lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Each step creaked under his weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence of the hotel. He ascended slowly, every sense on high alert, acutely aware that he was walking into the heart of a mystery that had claimed lives and ruined careers. The second-floor hallway loomed before him, room 237 waiting at the end like a malevolent sentinel. Mark's pulse raced as he approached, the master key clutched tightly in his sweating palm. This was at the moment of truth. Heart-pounding, Mark stood before room 237, the brass numbers gleaming dully in the dim emergency lighting. The air felt thick and oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was trying to ward him off. He inserted the master key with shaking hands, half expecting it to jam again. To his surprise, the lock turned smoothly this time. The door swung open with an ominous creak, revealing a room that looked as if it had been frozen in time. Everything was immaculate, preserved exactly as it had been a decade ago. The air was stale, carrying the faint metallic scent he had noticed earlier. Mark stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The beam fell upon the bed, where a stack of documents lay neatly arranged: financial records, photographs, and what appeared to be a handwritten confession. With a sense of trepidation, Mark approached and began to read. The truth was laid bare in those pages, a sordid tale of corruption, blackmail, and murder. Senator Blake's aide had discovered evidence of massive fraud involving government contracts and organized crime. He had threatened to go public with the information, naively believing he could expose the corruption without consequence. The aide was lured to the majestic Grand, to room 237, under the pretense of a secret meeting with a whistleblower. Instead, he found Senator Blake and his conspirators waiting. The ensuing confrontation turned violent, ending with the aide's death, a death that was then staged to look like suicide. The hotel's owners had been paid handsomely to keep the room sealed and the secret buried. Over the years, they had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up, silencing witnesses and deflecting investigations. The disturbances reported by guests were likely the result of guilt-ridden conspirators returning to the scene of the crime, perhaps seeking some form of redemption. As Mark read, he heard footsteps in the hallway behind him. He turned to see Vincent Donahue standing in the doorway, a gun trained on Mark's chest. The night manager's face was grim, his earlier soothing demeanor replaced by cold determination. "You should have left well enough alone, Mr. Holloway," Vincent said, his voice carrying none of its earlier warmth. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. But Vincent had underestimated Mark's resolve. In a surge of adrenaline, Mark lunged forward, using the heavy flashlight to knock the gun from Vincent's hand. The weapon clattered to the floor as the two men grappled, their struggle casting wild shadows on the walls of room 237. The fight was brief but violent. Mark, fueled by the desperate energy of a man fighting for his life and the truth, managed to overpower Vincent. As the night manager lay unconscious on the floor, Mark stood victorious, the evidence clutched in his trembling hands. Panting heavily, Mark looked around the room one last time. The truth about room 237 would finally come to light, and with it, the long-buried secrets of the majestic Grand Hotel. He had entered this night as a simple auditor, but would leave as the man who had unraveled a decade-old conspiracy. In the distance, Mark could hear sirens approaching. Someone, perhaps the fleeing Senator Blake, had alerted the authorities. Soon, the hotel would be swarming with police, and the carefully maintained facade of the majestic Grand would crumble. As he waited for the authorities to arrive, Mark reflected on the night's events. He had sought a quiet job to focus on his writing, but instead had stumbled into a real-life mystery more compelling than any story he could have invented. The majestic Grand had guarded its secrets well, but in the end, the truth could not stay hidden forever. The Nightmare Maestro's tale draws to a close, but the echoes of room 237 will linger long after the last page is turned. Remember, dear viewers, that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones grounded in the dark realities of human nature. What secrets might be lurking behind the doors of your local establishments? Subscribe for more chilling tales from the Nightmare Maestro, where we peel back the veneer of normalcy to reveal the horrors that lie beneath.